So today is day 4 of our 7-day series, and we'll be on Anum is here with us today to share some thoughts around the power of empathy for compassion and how the two relate and how we can, or for compassion, for cooperation, and how we can relate to both and how they tie together. And I'll let you go ahead and take over for now, Anum.
Thank you, Steve, and a warm welcome to everybody who has joined and made the time. I'm familiar with the fact that a few people here are in North America, so I know it's very early for you on a Sunday. So much gratitude from me and everybody at the Charter for Compassion for making the time. Just a quick bit about myself. My name is Anum. I am currently living in New Delhi, India, and I've been affiliated with the Charter for a number of years now. I am also a youth board member for the Charter for Compassion, and I recently took on the role of global youth strategist. So you'll notice in, I think, a lot of my presentation, there might be a bit of youth-oriented speak. So just giving everybody a bit of a disclaimer, but it's so wonderful to have all of you today. So good morning and good afternoon, I think, maybe to Alex. It's evening for me. So I love the fact that we're already representing different time zones all over the world. I think it'll be very conducive to our conversation today. And I'm just going to go ahead and share the slide deck. So please let me know if you are able to see it, and then start. But a very warm welcome to Robin, who I think has just joined. We're just about getting started. I would love to give everybody a bit of a brief of how the session is going to go. I'm going to spend hopefully about 25 minutes to 30 minutes just really having an open discussion about what the power of empathy as a deep and fundamental human virtue looks like when we speak about the peace building action of cooperation. And I'm going to walk us through a few slides. So please feel free to keep commenting in the chat or stop me whenever you feel like if you want to add something. And then we're going to do a meditation. And after that, we will spend some time in breakout rooms just to ponder over a few dialogue questions that we've come up with, and then we will gather around the hearth fire. And I feel that many people here have been sitting in for these sessions, so you may already be aware of the schedule and the flow of it, but for anybody who hasn't, that's what our time today will look like. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
I think Merida's cat is the only one who hasn't been here before.
Okay. And I hope everybody can see my screen. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to move it around for myself so I can still see all of you. So again, an introduction to today's session. I would love to explore the power of empathy for a cooperation mindset. And before we get into it, I'd love to just speak a little bit to why I chose this specific route when speaking about cooperation. So as most of you know, because I assume you've been sitting in for these sessions, the Charter has focused on these wonderful different values, if we can call them that, that are being really focused on in the peace games that the Charter is participating in, which a few of you might be participating in too. And of course, today's session is on cooperation. And when I was doing my research for this very topic, I myself am an empathy and compassion skill facilitator. So my bias of empathy and compassion kicked in when speaking about cooperation. And I really was drawn to the idea of how perhaps when we look at a cooperation mindset, what is the first thing that speaks out, to me at least? And that was really empathy. So I chose to focus our conversation today on this idea of empathy when it comes to really being able to get to a place to build more cooperation. So that's just a bit of an introduction to why I chose the route of empathy to explore a cooperation mindset. So, when we speak about a cooperation mindset, to me personally, it really speaks in terms of being an action-oriented aspect of peace building. Of course, there are so many wonderful virtues and ideas and qualities that we wish to cultivate to be able to arrive on the path of peace building. But when we think about cooperation, the word in itself has an energy of action, because in order to cooperate with the other or with plenty of others, we need to arrive at a fundamental understanding of the other. And what other way are we supposed to be able to do that rather than truly having a deeper cultivation of empathy in itself? And I think just this idea of an action oriented step towards peace building comes from being able to really sit at 1A with our own virtues and feelings and qualities, and be able to take that in relation to others. And I think that is where the idea of empathy really speaks to this this notion of being able to connect with another. So, of course, this question here is, what fundamental tools we may need to shift to a cooperation mindset is, of course, much oriented towards empathy, because that is what I chose to speak of. But I'd love to just open it up to the room, just to get a general sense of what others may think, even if it isn't empathy. What may you say that, if you had to pick a fundamental tool, or even just a tool, that we may need to acquire to be able to shift towards or deeper cultivate a cooperation mindset? And whatever the definition of cooperation is for you, we're going to get into that later. But just right off the bat, I'd love to just get a sense of what everybody thinks in the room. What would you say is one or even two fundamental tools that we may need to be able to shift ourselves to a place of truly cooperating with the other when it comes to the realm of peace building? And please feel free to just unmute and speak.
True listening. True
I'm
listening.
sorry, true listening.
Yeah, listening to people's stories and believing what they say, and not coming at it with something where you're sort of energetically pushing back, but you're truly open and you're listening and you're trying to understand their experience, being with
Right.
them as opposed to companioning and accompanying them in their storytelling. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that, Nadia. Thank you so much for sharing that. One term that comes to mind is deep and active listening, which I think is a beautiful articulation of what you're saying, is really being present and literally just listening with an active sense of trying to understand what the other is saying. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I can see in the chat, Karen says, welcome, Karen. Karen says, a calm heartbeat. And Susan says, suspending judgment. That's beautiful. Would any of you like to unmute just to shed a little more light on that?
As well as what everybody else has said, I think generosity. I think in order to be able to shift into that mindset, you need a lot of generosity with your time, with your space, with yourself. Share what you have.
Yeah. I'll unmute. I had trouble. I put calm heartbeat. Mainly what I'm looking at here is the self-regulated breathing, so to speak. If you're angry, okay, and that will have a physical manifestation in how you're breathing, then it's difficult to be in that cooperative mood. So it's in part of physiological state, but it's also in part an emotional state. So I didn't quite know how to frame that. And I also really agree with what Susan put in there of suspending judgment. I think of David Bohm and Bohm dialogue. And Bohm dialogue talks in terms of how if you could suspend your preconceived ideas kind of in a bubble in front of you, and be open to listening to everyone else before you, so that you don't listen through the censors of that bubble.
That's such an interesting, I think, way to put it. I hadn't really considered that before, so I feel like I just had an aha moment. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that, and thank you to everybody else who've shared their thoughts. Would anybody else like to say anything before we move on?
I would say respect. I would say
Res-
respect.
That's a great one. Yeah, I think that's definitely, I would say not just a fundamental, but a foundational tool to be able to shift to a cooperation mindset. And thank you so much, Robin, for sharing that. Susan, I can see you unmuted, but I don't know if you had wanted to share something.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk over the top of Robin. I just I think in addition to suspending judgment, I think it means coming with wonder and curiosity and an open heart and an open mind, so that you can really hear the other person or the many other people that you're interacting with.
Oh, absolutely. That's beautiful, Susan. Thank you so much. And I love that everybody has shared so many different things, and we're equipping ourselves with so much vocabulary. But what I see as a third person that's really tying this all together is really just a recognition of the other, which I would argue is a basic definition of empathy. And it's up to us to use our own wisdom and discernment to really be able to call that to our path and enable us to just practice that empathy for the other or for the others. And I'd love to just take what everybody has said and just go a little bit I think deeper into this idea of the true power that something like empathy, as whether we call it a human value or a human virtue or even a skill that we are using to be able to truly understand what the other is communicating or even existing in front of us as. And I think it's very important to just go back for a second. And I was telling Steve about this before we logged onto the call. I wrote an article, which I'd be happy to share with anybody who would want to read it, right in the beginning of COVID, about really being able to tap into the power of connection in a time of global adversity. And upon my research for this article, which of course was based on how we must really call our empathetic nature in terms of our human nature to be able to be more compassionate for the other or for those around us who are suffering. Upon my research, I found a really interesting quote that I personally never knew, even growing up when I was studying science. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Charles Darwin and his theory of survival of the fittest. And what I found in my research, and I'd love to just read this quote out to everybody. It's from his book, which is called The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. So he wrote, for those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. And this quote, of course, is in relation to Darwin's arguably most famous theory of survival of the fittest. And I know for me, in school and growing up throughout college as well, I always assumed survival of the fittest is a very cutthroat, whoever is able to, like, I suppose, just put all of their winning qualities is the one who's going to survive, and it's survival of the fittest. But upon deeper research, and I'd love to share all this data with anybody who wants it, so please do ask in the chat, and I'd be happy to share the articles I found. But there was a sociologist named Herbert Spencer who really took Darwin's theory and, I suppose, in layman's terms, flew with it and really coined the survival of the fittest term. And Darwin is not necessarily credited with saying that, because if you focus on the quote and the usage of the word sympathetic, which I suppose at that time we can attribute to qualities like empathy and perhaps even compassion, what Darwin was really suggesting through all of his scientific findings at the time was that a community or individuals that exhibited qualities of sympathy are the ones that would flourish the best. And when we contrast that with the idea of survival of the fittest, for me, this really blew my mind because it changed the entire theory. And I think if we go back into how the phrase is used, it really changes the game in terms of understanding that what he was really trying to comment on was a community that displays most empathy and sympathy for the others is the one that is going to be able to flourish. And when we come down to the question of why, that's because I suppose, and again, I'll speak from the I because this is an opinion and maybe others here have other opinions, but for me, it seems to really encapsulate the power that we have as human beings and the fact that we arrive into this world with a biologically, I suppose, disposition that really speaks to our basic humanity, which is being compassionate to others, which is really trying to understand each other. And we need empathy for that. And the reason I'm taking time to really get into this is because I feel like we cannot speak about cooperation without paying some kind of tribute to this beautiful aspect of empathy that we have. And it is most certainly a biological framework that we arrive into this world with. And how we cultivate it, or how that perhaps gets influenced in a way to not excel is I suppose something that we see on a daily basis, but it is a constant reminder that it is something that is wired into our inherent nature. And should we arrive to a place where we want to cultivate that deeply, I think we have all the tools within us to be able to do that. And I'd love to just spend a little time going over these concepts of why empathy is as important to overcome some of, even going back to what I just said in terms of influence, perhaps that has derailed us from really activating our empathy. I'd love to introduce the concept of in-group biases. And I'm aware that we have such a wise group here and everybody probably already knows what an in-group bias is, but just for the nature of the discussion. An in-group bias can loosely be defined as our bias towards a group that we may not necessarily identify with. And I think a good place to start with that may be gender. So for me, I am a woman, and perhaps if I would want to call other people that are in my in-group, I would think of other women. So women will be an in-group for me, and let's say any other gender will not necessarily be an in-group for me because I identify with the women around me. So that is an in-group. But when we take that further, we see from, I suppose, again, arguably speaking, but since the beginning of time, all of the roots of conflict and all of the roadblocks to any kind of peace building or cooperation, a fundamental part of that is an in-group bias and not being able to see others that we may not identify with, whether that's gender, whether that's religion, which is important to mention because we are really trying to honor Interfaith Harmony Week with these sessions, whether that is even political ideology, or even if we take it to something a little more surface level, like the sports teams that we support or don't support. These are all different aspects of us forming categories in our mind, and they become our in-group or our out-group. And when we speak about a bias, we speak about how we are very biased towards those who are in our in-group versus those who are not. And the only way, again, I would argue the only way to overcome that is to cultivate more empathy. And when we speak about empathy with what everybody has said in terms of our active listening or respect or being present for another or suspending our judgments, that is really what we are calling upon ourselves to do, is to remember that every single person, whether we agree with them or not, by their sheer existence of being a human being, fall under the same category of human. And that is perhaps the best way to be able to cultivate deeply a sense of empathy and further a sense of common humanity to the other. And I think it is a beautiful way to really spend time on understanding that this may be the opening of the door to some kind of cooperation. And just for a general definition of empathy, and there might be tons that are out there, but the one I have is empathy is the ability to understand the emotions, thoughts, and motivations of another and to resonate with them. And I'd love to just again read out what's on this slide, which is empathy in order to really attune ourselves to a deeper practice of common humanity in order to find ourselves in a cooperation mindset. So I think just in summary, and I'm well aware of the fact that I've been speaking for a very long time now, so I'd love to just open it up a bit before we go into our meditation. I think for me, when I think about cooperating with the other, when it comes to peace building, empathy is perhaps our most valuable and fundamental tool in order for us to really arrive at a place where we can evade our in-group biases for the other and remind ourselves that there is a deeper connection of common humanity that we may not necessarily be present with all the time, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is there. And in order to deeply cultivate that, there are many meditations and many ideas that we can truly just sit with and hopefully open the door to a more empathetic mindset. And by that virtue, open the door to a more cooperation mindset. And before we go into our meditation, I'd just love to open the floor in case anybody has a question or anybody just has a thought they'd like to share before we spend a few minutes going through a meditation, which I think some of you may have done before, but it's my favorite one. It's called the Just Like Me practice. So I'd love to just open the floor before we go into our meditation.
Anum,
Yeah,
it's Nancy.
Go ahead. Sorry, I have everybody really tiny, so I couldn't see if your hand was raised. My apologies.
As long as I'm showing up as a tiny rectangle of love, I'm fine. No reason to apologize. I want to thank you. Your explanation around survival of the fittest is in my notes now so that I can reflect further on that, because that really was a shift in thinking for me, as I always associated that with dominance. And I think empathy is the antithesis of what we're talking about. And so to have created that path feels really remarkable. And as a part of this conversation, and you speak of our in-groups, and I'm aligned with what everybody contributed to their thoughts in terms of deep, active listening, respect, suspending judgment. And for me, that sense of in-groups is now shifting, because I recognize that many of the groups I feel aligned with, or that are a part of my in-groups, are similar to many disabilities in that most of my in-groups are invisible. Mm-hmm. So you might be able to tell by looking at me that I'm an older woman, that I have white skin, that there's not much between me and sharing other things about myself, but deeper things to which I'm aligned are things I have in my heart that can only be exposed through that deep listening, through that openness and respect. So that just added another level of value to me for the practice of deep listening, empathetic behaviors, and a higher likelihood to discover common humanity through not just listening, but being vulnerable enough to share some of the experiences that I've had that have put me perhaps in groups I would never have chosen to be a part of. And yet there I am. And who knows who else is in those groups without having that deep listening and that conversation. So thank you for those gifts.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing that. It's so wonderful to hear how you are able to reflect on something like this and create I suppose, some kind of a perspective or paradigm shift. And I think that really speaks to our constant growth and our constant evolution. And I think what you have modeled for all of us here is active listening and really being able to be present with what we're speaking about. And I love the example that you used, how there may be others in a group that may or may not feel the same way in terms of the in-group aspect. So thank you so much for bringing that to light. I deeply appreciate your thoughts and reflection. Thank you. And I think we're going to spend a few minutes now doing a practice. And I had just a bit of a disclaimer. I had originally thought that I would lead the practice, but then I found this beautiful video. And I think the person leading the practice will do a much better job than I will. So I'm going to play the video off of YouTube. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Jinpa, Dr. Thupten Jinpa. He is a leading voice in this beautiful field of social emotional learning. He's the founder and chairman of Compassion Institute and also the principal author of Compassion Cultivation Training, which I assume some of you are familiar with. And he was also the official translator of the Dalai Lama for many years. So he is a gift to the world, and there's a beautiful meditation practice that he leads. It's called Just Like Me. And the reason I want to play this video is we also get to hear it very articulate, short, but some of his reflections on the power of empathy and compassion. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can play the video, and I hope it will play with sound. It's always a bit of a challenge on Zoom. So you'll let me know if it doesn't. Just gonna. Okay. And of course, before we get into the meditation, just in terms of some invitational prompts, if you feel comfortable switching off your camera and following the meditation, please feel free to do so. And if you feel any kind of dysregulation throughout the meditation, please know that this is a safe space and you can choose not to participate in the meditation. So, okay. I'm going to try to make it big screen. I hope it's expanded for everybody. Okay, perfect. And sorry, I just realized that I didn't press share sound. So I'm going to.
And it wasn't expanded yet, so.
No, okay. Well, let's hope it expands.
We could see your screen.
Okay. Is it the big
Yes.
screen?
Yes.
Yeah, lovely.
Hope you can hear it.
I would like to invite you to join me in this short reflective practice. We call this practice Just Like Me meditation. And the aim here is to really allow us to connect with the common humanity that we share with everybody. As in any other type of meditation or reflective practice, it's important at the beginning to find a comfortable posture.
Let us get something straight. Weight loss is not just
Sorry
about
about
calories
that.
in and calories
My
out. If you keep
goodness.
losing calories,
Let's hope
So
that's
the body
one.
is relaxed, but also facilitates alertness. And then let's begin by drawing our mind inwards, either using our breathing as an anchor or attention to a part of body as an anchor, and rest our attention on our breath, noticing consciously the air coming in and going out. And if you feel the need, you can even take some deep breaths, like breathing all the way in, holding it briefly, and then letting it out slowly, like from the mouth. And that deep breathing exercise is helpful, just to slow down the energy of your mind. So let's settle our mind in this way, resting our attention on our breathing. Now, from this more quietened state of mind, let's bring to mind someone in our life that we interact, but we don't know this person that well. Kind of a stranger, but not total stranger, but someone that we kind of visually see but don't know that well. Think of this person and think aloud for yourself, just like me. This person too wishes to be happy, do not want suffering. Wishes to be loved. Wishes to find joy and meaning, just like me. Rest your mind on this simple recognition of this very important universal fact. Just like me. Now bring to your mind someone in your life, and many of us do, that you find difficult for some whatever reason. Think of this person and also say to yourself, just like me, this person too wishes to be happy, do not want suffering, wants to be loved. Wants prosperity, good health, loving relationships, just like me. Now let's be braver and expand the circle and include everyone in your neighborhood. And say to yourself, just like me, everyone in my neighborhood wishes to be happy, do not want suffering, wants to be loved, wants prosperity, good health, and to feel safe, just like me. Let's now be braver and expand further and include the entire world, 7 billion plus humanity, and say to ourselves, just like me, every single human on this earth do not want suffering, wishes to be happy, wants to be loved, wants prosperity, good health, to feel safe, just like me. And let's rest our mind on this recognition of common humanity and the common human condition of each one of us sharing this planet. And let's end this practice by wishing that may we all find happiness, may we all be free from suffering, may we all find love. And joy. And you can bring your attention back on your breathing and your body. Thank you. So this kind of common humanity practice is particularly actually helpful, especially if you're struggling with certain individuals in your relationship and interaction, that you're finding it very hard. Doing a just like me practice with a special focus on that person can actually also be very powerful. At least it will, enable you to, while having difficult interaction, not to forget the shared humanity that binds you together. And once you're able to do that, then any interaction on your part in relating to that person will come from a place that is more constructive, that's more empathetic and understanding. So it can be really powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for sitting through that. And I hope you found it as helpful as I do. This is a practice I often return to when I'm lost and able to come back to my common humanity. And I think it's important to also acknowledge that nobody is perfect and we are continuing to grow and evolve, especially when it comes to cultivating these tools, and or as we call them, skills or human values. And just before we take some time to go into breakout rooms, I'd love to just do a quick recap of everything we've discussed. And I know I've spoken a lot and it's gone very quickly, but I think for me, it was very important that we spend time on really exploring this idea of empathy as a foundational human value in order to reach a place where we can understand the importance of common humanity, because I think that is what opens the door to any kind of cooperation, whether that's in peace building. And I think it wouldn't be wise not to acknowledge the many conflicts that we are plagued with in today's day and age. And this Interfaith Harmony Week comes at a very significant time in terms of the global landscape. And I think we would all do well to spread this idea of these beautiful tools that we have, no matter how conflicted they are or how difficult some of those conversations may be in our communities, in our workspace, in our politics. But it is important to remember that we are inherently wired with these values of empathy, of compassion, and they really allow us to honor a kind of thread of common humanity. And perhaps that is what opens the door to cooperation for us. And with that, I think we might be a little well set now to have some breakout room conversations and really deeply explore what cooperation might mean for us. And Steve has kindly made a slide that is going to just have a few questions. And I think we're going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes. Is that correct, Steve? Just to collect our thoughts, ponder what we might want to say for these questions. And then I believe we're going to be sent into breakout rooms and in pairs. And we're going to spend, sorry, Steve, I don't want to give incorrect instructions. We're going to spend about a minute or two on each question, is it?
Probably like 2 minutes each, which would give us at least 20 minutes in the breakout rooms.
Great.
Yeah.
And we'll come back and have a wider roundtable discussion. So over to you, Steve, for sharing them. And thank you again for being the tech support.
Most certainly. And also I'm placing them in the chat, and that will follow you into the breakout rooms for reference.
I can go ahead and just read them, just in case somebody isn't able to read from their screen. So I'll just quickly read them. So we have, what does cooperation mean for you? And then we have, what can you do to embrace empathy and cooperation internally? And then we have, what keeps you from embracing empathy and cooperation? And the last one is, what might you promote cooperation through empathy? Sorry, my bad. How might you promote cooperation through empathy? perhaps we take another minute or so to wrap up our thoughts before we go into our breakout rooms. I think if everybody has collected their thoughts, we can, Steve, are we okay to go into the rooms or?
Soon as I'm in the process of getting them set up.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry to rush you.
Okay.
All the more we get more time to collect our thoughts. Always very important.
Okay, I'll stop the screen sharing and send you all into breakout rooms. Have fun.
Thank you for that, Alex. We honor your patience. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back.
Okay.
So
Oh, go ahead, Steve. I just wanted to make sure we were recording, and we are. So
we are
perfect.
recording, yes. So now is our chance to share with each other either your experience of breakout rooms or your thoughts regarding any of the questions regarding empathy and cooperation. So feel free to chime on in.
So I had a lovely, lovely discussion with Robin. So thank you so much, Robin. And in that discussion, two things came up that I'll just share with the group. One is she talked about like our compassion lens, our empathy lens. And so there's like the little lens you can put in your eye, but I wanted a really big lens. I wanted to hold a lens like this big, that so everywhere I looked, I was seeing through a lens of empathy, compassion, acceptance, cooperation. So that's just a visual for me. And then towards literally the end of the conversation, I remembered the Hopi nation story of two wolves, and the wolf that is jealous and angry and vengeful, and the wolf who is loving and compassionate and caring. And the child says around the campfire, so which wolf wins? And the grandmother says, whichever wolf you feed. And so I just wanted to always remember to be feeding the compassionate, cooperative, empathetic, loving, serving wolf. And the other wolf, doesn't die. It's still there, but I'm just not going to feed it. So those were my two takeaways from this. So thank you.
That's a lovely image. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I was honored to sit with Samina, and she made me realize how really it is that when we meet someone a bit deeper, on a deeper level, it's easier to cooperate. So I can see Samina on this group as, I know she's a loving square and a rectangle, as Nancy puts it, and Jamal put it on the first day. But when I get to talk to her, my empathy grows, and it was so easy to find points where we can cooperate. That was the example of what we're now of today's thing, and that was beautiful. So I got her email. If anyone else wants to cooperate with her, you can. Her email is in the chat. But that's because that's what came up, and I loved it.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I am so grateful to have been able to share a bit of time with Nadia, who brought to my attention on the first question and articulated beautifully how cooperation can mean that everyone matters, that everyone feels seen and heard, and that we can, and I would add should, notice our internal chatter and use our ability, strengthen our capacity for shutting off our internal chatter and eliminating our personal biases, setting things aside so that we can actually receive in that suspended judgment what the other or others are contributing without an intended outcome, which to me really speaks to the beauty of true compassion in action, is that we don't know what's going to happen next. We only can be aware of what we're doing and what our potential is to contribute through these various methods to the best that we can be and not interfere with the best that other people can be.
Mhm. Thank you, Nancy.
I had the great honor of being in a room with Alex. And what I treasured most about Alex, he shared a deep personal story of service and of compassion. And then in his work now, the fact that he received that deep compassion and caring affected him in such a deep level that he couldn't help but now extend that out to the most vulnerable in his community. And so I just saw that as a beautiful gift of when we are cooperating, it's an exchange. It's a accept or a taking and a giving. So you receive the empathy and the compassion and the care, and then that can't help but ignite the divine within you that you go forth and shower that on another group. And so thank you very much, Alex, for sharing your deep personal story.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. For me, one thing that comes to mind through our conversation is I tend to relate to the word compassion more than empathy. And it's in a way, compassion is what ties empathy and active cooperation together. Compassion is sort of empathy in action, just like the cooperation as it's been presented is also an action. It's not just an internal process. And yeah, so I go back in my own life, I go back to, putting empathy into action as what moves me towards compassion.
I'd like to add one thing to that if I could. So I serve as the liaison between the International Charter for Compassion and Compassionate St. Augustine, which has been a compassionate city for a little over 10 years now. And it's been so richly rewarding to get to find ways to cooperate and collaborate. I would like to give an example from just World Interfaith Harmony Week that I got to share a rectangle of love with Alex 3 days ago, and then, or 2 days ago. Then yesterday, I got to share a rectangle of love with Sister Martha in San Antonio. Today, I got to share a rectangle of love with Nadia in Canada. So I'm getting to feel this cooperation around the world. And as a part of my conversation yesterday with Sister Martha in San Antonio, I learned about a project she's working on that felt like it would work well and serve some of the people in Alex's community as well. So to be able to add that, and then in a conversation yesterday with someone from Compassionate St. Augustine, I realized that there are people here in my own community who will also benefit from the opportunity to participate in this youth-centered art movement for children who are needing to express themselves through some art form. And whenever these elements that are just being gifted into my life, these people who make me aware of things, align and come together in such a way that I feel like, okay, that goes forth and flows into whatever levels of cooperation those who are participating can become aware of and actively engage in. So anyway, it's just a very exciting, real component. And our Compassionate St. Augustine t-shirts that we had made for the Silent March for Reverend Dr. King's holiday a couple weeks ago, they have Compassionate St. Augustine on the front, and on the back they say compassion, empathy in action. And they're a real big item now locally. So anyway, just another bonus to share.
So wonderful.
Yeah. And Nancy, what you just shared, I might have to modify or add to my sort of definition of compassion and have it be compassion is empathy in action as well as empowering others. Because ultimately, that's where we're striving to go. We're just not in our own like little silos doing our work amongst our in bias group or our outer bias group, but it's branching out and sort of along the lines of, do we give someone who's hungry a fish, one fish, or do we teach them to fish? It's sort of along those lines.
Thank you, Steve. That's actually a really great point. Susan says, maybe we invite them to dinner.
Yes. and Merida shared that Samina said something similar. Cooperation takes two or more. You cannot cooperate alone. And yeah, that's a very good point. And any other comments or thoughts?
It also takes a lot of internal work, though, which is the part that one would do a lot, isn't it? So, once again, just like the other themes that we've been seeing during this week of World Interfaith Harmony Week, we've been seeing how a lot of what happens in us, so we need to strengthen our inner core, ourselves, in order to be able to reach out and accompany others. So it's always a two-way kind of action that's required all the time. It's very beautiful.
If I could add just a little something to that, because I recently became aware of something that was an aha moment for me. So I agree, Merida, with strengthening our core. Before I strengthen my core, I've found that I need to examine what is at my core and become more aware of that. As honestly, I didn't know until about a week ago that a core belief that I hold could be wrong.
Mm.
And until I discovered that, I didn't have the facility to look at that erroneous core belief and say, I need to let go of that.
Yeah. You reminded me of the Gulliver's Travels. He arrives to a country that's divided in two, and it's which way up do they open the boiled egg? That divides them. We have that at home. My mom opens it upside down. You're doing it the wrong way up, Mom. He's like, no, you are.
Great metaphor.
Yeah.
It's so easy to be divided, isn't it? And not cooperate.
Yeah.
Always
I
eat.
have a question for the group gathered here today, because Nadia and I did not talk about our historic faith traditions. And in my other two breakout groups, I've been with people who were cradle Catholics, and I'm a cradle Catholic too. So I'm just curious, are we here gathered from a multitude of faith traditions?
Well, I identify myself as a recovering Catholic and had to let go of that to where now I'm embracing earth-centered or earth empathetic spiritual system.
And I should say that I'm a small c Catholic, in that I believe that all of us belong together, no matter what our faith tradition or basic foundational learning might have been. I've subscribed to the small c universal Catholic faith.
I was raised atheist.
Okay.
And now I just love to read and practice and connect with all religions and all faiths, all cultures. And it's nice. So I think I've become agnostics. something is there. Something does bring us together somehow. What is it? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Have some really wonderful comments in the chat as well.
There are. Leading up to this week, I watched some YouTube videos and came across a couple terms that I wasn't really familiar with, and regarding how people identify their religions. And one that I resonated with is panentheism, and that's where God is in everything and everything is in God, and not God specific, but the creative force, the creator, the divine is in everything and everything's in the divine. And I love that. And we'd have to say that's how I identify myself.
I'm finding it interesting that we kind of got onto this trail of how religion or theologies have kind of shaped us, because one of the things that came up in the conversation with Alex in terms of a question 3, what keeps me from empathy, connects to this a perversion of the truest identity of the world's religions. And so I try to identify with the mystical aspect of all religions, because I think, Steve, they get to that point of God's in everything, everything is in God. However, when I encounter, regardless of what religion, the part that tends to lean towards fundamentalism and the concept that we are the only religion or we are the best religion, then I have trouble empathizing with someone that holds that belief. And I shared that with Alex.
Yeah. And when that comes with a gun in your hand, in their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
One we need to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because that happens everywhere.
Mm.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting that you mentioned the gun in the hand, because it reminds me of a lesson that came to my awareness from one of my graduate students about a dozen years, who was struggling with some gun violence issues. And I was able to share with this student my personal experience when I was in a relationship and chose to break off the relationship, and was met with the threat of my life with a gun at my head. And when I shared that story with the student, I was saying how I had gotten involved in mothers demanding action and ending the addressing the gun issues that we have. And the student said to me, "How lovely of you to have not chosen to work against the human who did that to you, and instead against the tool that the human chose." Now, I never thought about it like that. That was just my response or reaction. Anyway, it made me more aware that I can choose to oppose the action of a person rather than be opposed to that person. And that was a big opening created for me. Another gift from a student, one of many.
That was a real present. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Sharing your vulnerability with us.
And an answer to that problem.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Are there any other sharings before we sign off and temporarily close our rectangles of love? Until next time.
This was a beautiful session.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anum, for guiding that.
Yeah.
It's really, really beautiful. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everybody who was here and to everybody who shared. I'm taking it all in. I think that's the most beautiful part of this for me, is to hear everybody's reflections and thoughts. And I'd love to also take a moment to thank Steve, who has been such a great support and guide throughout this entire process of planning, and also being the wonderful tech support for us today and in all the other sessions. And a special shout out to the RISE team at the Charter. Everybody's done such beautiful work in cooperation to make these few sessions. So much love and gratitude to everyone. And of course, to everybody who participated today. What an honor to be a part of this circle today.
Thank you. So beautiful. Merida, I have a question for you about tomorrow, as the schedule coincides with our staff volunteer meeting. Are you making a recommendation there?
Follow your heart.
I'll do that. I'll see you
I'll
probably.
mention in this volunteer and staff meeting that some people might not be there because they are here, I hope. So
Beautiful.
and,
If I'm not there, I'm here.
exactly. And if you're not here, we understand you're there. So yeah,
Beautiful. So grateful for this time to share.
it is.
Love
It's a
you all.
beautiful time to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Steve
Tomorrow.
might have a last recommendation, right?
Oh,
Tomorrow.
I was just going to say, tomorrow's theme is on peace building. So, and then on Tuesday, it's love for one another. And Wednesday is faith and hope, that, faith in ourselves and in what we're building here, and hope that we will succeed in spreading light and peace and love throughout the world. So would love to have you all join us.